The small chapel smelled of wildflowers and wood polish. Golden light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the aisle in warm colors, crimson, amber, and gold. Every pew was filled, and the soft murmur of guests rippled through the air as the music began. Heads turned toward the doors, anticipation thick enough to touch. And then, silence. Emma appeared in the doorway, her hands resting gently on the rims of her wheelchair. Her gown, a cascade of lace and satin, had been custom-made to flow perfectly over her legs and wheels, every detail a statement of dignity and beauty. Her veil shimmered under the soft light as she took her first movement forward, rolling instead of walking, but every inch a bride. Her heart pounded so loudly she could barely hear the piano. Each face she passed held a different story, some smiling with support, others glancing away, unsure of how to look at her without pity. But Emma kept her chin high. This was her day, her moment. She had spent the past 2 years fighting to feel like herself again after the accident that changed everything. One rain-slick road, one spin of tires, and her legs had gone still forever. The doctor said she'd adjust. But no one really prepares you for losing the part of yourself that used to dance, run, chase sunsets. No one tells you how hard it is to sit in silence when people whisper words like, "poor thing," behind your back. And yet, somehow, through that darkness, she'd met Luke. She still remembered that first day at the community rodeo, when she'd been trying to find her way over the uneven gravel path, and a quiet, broad-shouldered cowboy had appeared without a word, steadying her chair. He hadn't looked at her with sympathy, only with a kind of calm respect. Later, he offered her lemonade, and they talked for hours. He never once asked about the accident. Instead, he asked about her dreams. That day, she'd realized he wasn't seeing her chair, he was seeing her. Now, as she moved down the aisle toward him, that same cowboy stood at the altar, hat held respectfully in his hands, eyes fixed on her as if she were the only person in the world. But behind her, in the last pews, came a different kind of whisper. 2 women, former classmates from high school, sat leaning into each other, giggling behind manicured fingers. They had always been the loud ones, the ones who measured worth by looks and status. Emma had once tried to be friends with them, back when she cared what people thought. She'd learned better. Still, their words carried easily through the still air. "Can you believe this?" one muttered, not even bothering to lower her voice. "A bride in a wheelchair, poor Luke. He must have felt sorry for her." The other chuckled softly. "Guess she'll need ramps everywhere now. Wonder how they'll handle the honeymoon. Maybe he'll have to carry her around." Emma's grip on her wheels tightened. Her throat went dry, her breath catching painfully in her chest. She stared ahead, refusing to look back, but the cruel laughter felt like knives scraping across her heart. She thought she was past caring what people said, but hearing it here, on this day, broke something fragile inside her. Her smile trembled. She focused on Luke, on the way he was watching her, steady as stone, his eyes full of warmth. He had no idea what was being said behind him, and for a brief moment, she was grateful. This was supposed to be perfect. She wouldn't let anyone ruin it. Still, as she passed the middle aisle, her vision blurred. She blinked fast, praying no one noticed. Her father's arm rested reassuringly on her shoulder as he walked beside her, but even his comforting touch couldn't quiet the sting of those whispered cruelties. Emma forced herself to breathe. "You are more than this chair. You are loved. You belong here." Luke smiled as she approached, the corners of his mouth lifting with pride. That look alone reminded her why she was here, not for approval, not for appearances, but for love. For them. But the laughter at the back grew again, soft, but cruelly timed, just as the music swelled. A few guests turned, frowning. The bullies didn't notice. They were too caught up in their own petty amusement to realize the shift in the air. And they didn't see the cowboy move. Luke had been patient his whole life. He didn't speak much, didn't need to. But something in the sound of that laughter, directed at his bride, broke through the calm exterior he'd built. His jaw clenched. Without a word, he lowered his hat, turned on his heel, and began walking down the aisle toward the back of the church. Guests gasped softly. The pianist's hands hesitated on the keys. Emma froze, watching in confusion as her cowboy's tall figure moved with deliberate calm. Luke's boots struck the chapel floor with a sound that silenced the entire room, slow, steady, and full of purpose. Every guest turned toward him, unsure of what was about to happen. His broad shoulders filled the narrow aisle as he made his way to the back where the laughter had come from. The piano had stopped playing. The only sounds were the echo of his boots and the quiet flutter of Emma's breath. The two women, Tessa and Carly, were still smirking, oblivious. They'd known Luke back in school too, back before he became the quiet, respected cowboy everyone in town looked up to. They remembered him as the boy who never said much, the one who always kept to himself. They never imagined that silence could be dangerous. When his shadow fell over their pew, the laughter died instantly. Something funny back here. Luke's voice was low, even, like distant thunder. Not loud, but heavy enough to make the air tremble. The women froze. Carly swallowed hard. Tessa, ever the bolder one, straightened in her seat and tried to smile. "Oh, Luke, we were just joking." Joking, he cut her off quietly, tilting his head slightly. About her, his tone wasn't angry. It was something colder, something that made the women wish he'd yelled instead. His eyes, gray as steel, didn't blink. He looked at them as though he could see straight through every cruel thought they'd ever had. "I wasn't," Tessa began, but her voice cracked. "We didn't mean." Luke leaned a little closer. "You didn't mean for her to hear. Or you didn't mean for anyone to call you out on it." The words hit harder than any shout could have. The entire chapel was holding its breath now. Even the pastor stood frozen, uncertain whether to intervene. But Luke wasn't looking for a fight. He was delivering a lesson. "She's been through hell and back," he said quietly. "She fought to live when doctors told her she wouldn't walk. She learned to smile when most folks would have quit on life, and you sit back here laughing like she's some kind of joke." Tessa's eyes filled with tears. Carly lowered her head, cheeks flushing red. Luke's voice softened, but the weight of it only deepened. "You think strength looks like muscles or boots or standing tall?" he asked, glancing briefly toward Emma. "You've got no idea. Strength is waking up every morning in pain and still finding a reason to smile. It's rolling into a room full of people who stare and doing it anyway. That woman up there," he pointed gently toward the altar. "She's got more grit in her than most men I've ever met. Including me." A murmur of agreement passed through the crowd. A few guests nodded, others looked away in shame. Luke straightened up, placing his hat back on his head. He didn't raise his voice, didn't curse, didn't humiliate. He simply looked at them one last time and said, "If you can't understand what love and courage look like, you're in the wrong place." Then he turned and walked back down the aisle, leaving silence in his wake. Every step he took felt like a heartbeat in the stillness. Emma's eyes followed him, her vision blurred with tears, not of sadness, but of pride. She'd never seen him angry before. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke, every syllable carried truth. When he reached her, Luke knelt beside her wheelchair, his expression softening instantly. The hard edges in his face melted away as he took her hands. "Ignore them, darlin'," he whispered, voice tender now. "You roll to me, I'll meet you halfway." Her lips trembled into a smile. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "I know," he said simply, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "But I wanted to." He rose and extended his hand. Emma's fingers slipped into his, and together, they moved forward, her wheels turning, his boots matching her rhythm. The crowd watched in complete silence, many wiping tears they didn't even realize had fallen. By the time they reached the altar again, the tension had lifted. The pastor cleared his throat softly and resumed the ceremony. But something had changed. The energy in the room was no longer polite sympathy, it was reverence. Respect. Emma's heart felt lighter than it had in years. She looked up at Luke, and all the fear, the shame, the lingering doubt vanished. The whispers behind her no longer mattered. The pitying glances she'd feared so much were gone. In that moment, there were only two people in the world. The cowboy who had seen her strength long before she believed in it herself, and the woman who refused to let a wheelchair define her worth. Luke gave her hand a gentle squeeze. "Ready, Mrs. Walker," he murmured. Her smile was radiant, glowing through her tears. More than ever, as the ceremony continued, guests could feel something different in the air, something powerful and unspoken. Love wasn't about perfection, or appearances, or walking down an aisle the traditional way. It was about loyalty, courage, and standing up for each other when it mattered most. The ceremony continued, but the air inside the chapel had completely changed. Where there had been whispers, there was now silence filled with reverence. The same people who had once looked at Emma with quiet pity now watched her with awe. Luke stood beside her, his hand resting protectively on hers, the very picture of calm strength. When the pastor reached the words, "Do you, Luke Walker, take this woman," his voice trembled slightly, maybe from emotion, maybe from the sheer weight of what had just unfolded. "I do," Luke said simply, his tone steady, honest, and full of warmth. "And do you, Emma Brooks, take this man?" Emma looked up into Luke's eyes. For the first time that day, her nerves disappeared completely. "I do," she whispered. The crowd exhaled collectively. The pastor smiled. "Then, by the power vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss the bride." Luke didn't hesitate. He dropped to one knee before her wheelchair and cupped her face gently in his hands. The moment their lips met, the crowd erupted in applause. Some stood, others wiped tears, but no one could deny what they'd just witnessed: real love, raw and unshakable. The kiss wasn't just a symbol, it was a declaration. A promise that no obstacle, no wheelchair, no cruel words, no scars, could stand between them. When they finally pulled apart, Emma laughed softly, embarrassed by the cheers. "Guess we gave them something to talk about," she whispered. Luke grinned, his thumb brushing against her cheek. "Let 'em talk, darlin'. Long as they know who you are." As they rolled down the aisle together, flower petals rained around them. The same bullies who had mocked her earlier now couldn't even meet her eyes. Their faces were pale, ashamed. The laughter that once echoed from their lips had turned into uneasy silence. Outside, the afternoon sun bathed the countryside in golden light. The sky stretched wide and blue over the open fields, and the wind carried the scent of wildflowers. The old wooden barn where the reception was held stood proudly in the distance, decorated with twinkling lights and mason jars filled with daisies. Luke helped Emma out of the chapel doors, one hand steady on her chair, the other waving to the guests. They stopped for photos, for hugs, for blessings, but through it all, their eyes never drifted far from each other. Eventually, the two women approached, Tessa and Carly. They looked smaller now, their confidence gone. Tessa's mascara had smudged, Carly's eyes were red. "Emma," Tessa started softly, voice trembling. We're sorry. We didn't mean to." Emma lifted her hand gently. "It's all right," she said, her tone calm but firm. "You didn't know better. But now you do." Tessa nodded, biting her lip. Carly whispered, "You look beautiful up there." Emma smiled faintly. "Thank you. Just remember something, kindness never goes out of style." They nodded again, heads bowed, and slipped away into the crowd. Luke, standing behind Emma, gave her shoulder a squeeze. "You handled that better than I ever could've," he murmured. "I didn't need to fight them," she said, looking up at him. "You already did," he chuckled softly. "Guess we make a good team, huh?" Later, as the reception began, music filled the air, soft country tunes blending with laughter and clinking glasses. Friends and family surrounded them, telling stories, offering toasts, and dancing under strings of warm lights. When it came time for the first dance, Luke knelt beside Emma once more. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Walker?" Emma laughed, a sound that carried pure joy. "I can't dance, Luke." He shook his head. "Sure you can." He took her hands, and with gentle precision, began moving her chair in slow circles as he stepped beside her, leading her across the wooden floor. The crowd formed a circle around them, silent again, but this time out of admiration. The music swelled, and the couple moved in perfect harmony, her wheels turning smoothly, his steps guiding, matching her rhythm like they'd done it 1,000 times before. For Emma, it felt like flying. She didn't feel the chair anymore. She just felt free. When the song ended, applause thundered again. Emma's cheeks were wet with tears, but her smile was radiant. As the evening faded into night, Luke pushed her chair toward the barn's porch. The stars were out now, blanketing the ranch in silver light. Crickets sang softly in the distance. "Still think you don't belong here?" he asked gently, leaning against the railing beside her. Emma looked out over the fields, the same ones where she'd once thought she'd never feel whole again. "No," she said quietly, smiling. "I think I finally do." Luke tipped his hat and smiled back. "Told you, darlin', you were never the one who needed saving." She reached up, touching his hand. "Neither were you," she whispered. He laughed softly and leaned down to kiss her again. Behind them, laughter and music echoed through the night, but for a moment, the world was just them, the cowboy and his bride, two souls who had faced the worst and found beauty anyway.